we are here as the representatives of WISACT, but of course, like our audience would not know much about WISACT, we'll explain it shortly as well. But first of all, I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers and our co-moderator, Nikolas Thomopoulos. I'll just start with him. Nikolas is a senior lecturer in transport at the University of Surrey. He has a background in economics and a PhD in transport from the University of Leeds, where he was also a Marie Curie scholar. He's the chair of WISACT, which he will explain in detail very shortly. Nikolas has an immense experience in international research projects and collaborations like the one we are all in. Our first speaker is then Amalia Polydoropoulou. Sorry for the pronunciations, by the way. And Amalia is a professor at the Department of Shipping, Trade and Transport and director of the Transportation and Decision-Making Laboratory at the University of Aegean. Amalia is an engineer by training, and her research includes transportation systems, transportation demand, market research, and econometrics. She has extensive experience on primary data collection, demand modeling, forecasting techniques, and business models development. Our second speaker will be Karel Martens. Karel is professor of transport planning at the Faculty of Architecture and Town Planning Technion-Israel Institute of Technology, where he also chairs the graduate program in urban and regional planning. He is also the head of the Technion's Fair Transport Lab, and he's an international expert on transport and justice. And in addition to his numerous publications, his recent book, Transport Justice, Designing Fair Transportation Systems, is a very important source for understanding transport-related inequalities. Our third speaker is Floridea Di Ciommo. Floridea is an economist and urban analyst with a PhD in transport planning. She is the co-director of cambiaMO, which is a non-profit cooperative organization based in Madrid, working towards healthier, more sustainable and equitable urban mobility models and patterns. She has an extensive academic experience on travel behavior modeling, and she's also an expert on inclusive mobility with a specific focus on gender. Our fourth speaker is Siegfried Rupprecht, and Siegfried is the owner and executive director of Rupprecht Consult, which our audience may be familiar with their work on developing sustainable urban mobility plans, SUMPs. Siegfried is a social scientist and has specialized in urban development and sustainable mobility in Europe and worldwide. And with his team, he develops and manages international research and innovation projects since 1991. And he's strongly involved in many urban development initiatives such as Civitas, SUMP, and other policy processes of the European Union. Our final speaker is Miloš Mladenović. Miloš is an assistant professor at the Spatial Planning and Transportation Engineering Group, Department of Built Environment, School of Engineering, Aalto University. He's also an engineer by training, yet he has a broad range of research interests, including assessment of emerging mobility technologies and development of decision support methods. Miloš has also been organizing chair for the transdisciplinary Aalto University Summer School on Transportation, ASTRA, since 2015, which also our researchers, PhD students are very familiar with. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Nikolas, if you're ready.
Hello.
Okay.
Yes, unfortunately, I can see, there is an issue with the camera, and I'd like to apologize to everyone for that. Hopefully it will be resolved in a bit, but in the meanwhile, maybe I can briefly introduce WISACT. So just to say, first of all, thank you very much to the organizer of the Urban Forum and to Beyazıt. So this is great to be here. I think it's a very hot topic, very interesting topic we're discussing here. And our session will focus on autonomous and connected transport. So this is what we've been focusing on with this great group of experts from across Europe and beyond, actually, in more than 40 countries. So we have 5 working groups. And today we have representatives from Working Group 1, Working Group 2, Working Group 4, and we'll cover the other 2, Working Group 3 and 5. I will cover for those in a bit. So overall, I'd just like to say that it's very promising, very different perspectives we're going to discuss, and hopefully we'll cover a range of interesting issues. So Eda will just stop it here, and then maybe you can take the floor now, and maybe we can start with the discussion.
Okay, thanks Thanks, Nikolas. So our first question is to Amalia, actually. So Amalia, while introducing your topics and what you're doing at WISE Act, actually, and specifically, could you also define us what ACT is, and maybe for those who may not be familiar with the concept, and how do you think ACT will alter travel behavior in relation to that? What would be the consequences of ACT on different settlements, and also your contribution in understanding travel behavior in WISE Act? Thank you. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eda. It's a high pleasure to be able to participate at this Marmara Forum 2021 and to be able to respond to such questions and present some of the research that actually lead us to the better understanding of the impact of the autonomous and connected transport on travel behavior. Can you see my screen?
We were seeing your screen when you did full screen. I think we lost it. Is
now?
It me or yeah? Now we can see it.
Okay, so I'll use it like this.
Okay.
Some brief terminology. I'm sure that everybody is aware of the autonomous and automated vehicles. And what I would like to stress here is that the WISE Act is focusing basically on level 5 of automation. So we are doing research trying to understand how the future of transportation will be when autonomous cars will be available and there is basically little or no human input in the driving. And it's connected because we have the vehicle-to-vehicle connection, vehicle-to-infrastructure, and vehicle-to everything, which is information that is transferred among everybody. I would like to stress that there is a WISE Act glossary that will be soon available online. So if we want of all these terminologies, it's an output of WISE Act that a lot of our colleagues worked from all over Europe. When we're talking about ACT and travel behavior, there is a lot of discussion about what are the pros, what are the cons, and it all depends on who the decision makers are. So we have the travelers, the commuters, the consumers of parcels, for example, with autonomous drones or autonomous vans. And we have also the commercial operators who will send all these parcels and equipment with autonomous vehicles. So if we talk about the travelers and the commuters, we can see that perhaps we will spend time inside the autonomous vehicles, and other than driving, we can do other things. This is called multitasking. We will have lower operating costs, lower parking costs, for example, and this could lead to reduced vehicle miles of travel, congestion, and emissions, probably increased safety, and of course, reduced driver burden. And on the other side, if all these things happen, then people might decide to travel more, so conduct more vehicle trips, and then instead of the travel time and the congestion to decrease, it might increase. People might decide to live further from their work, so they have longer trips, and there are also all these cybersecurity issues. Now, in order to really understand what is the effect of these transformational transport new technologies and to achieve these social benefits, it's really crucial to understand travelers' behavior and decisions. And some of them are long-term decisions, some of them are medium-term, where we would have some mixed traffic, and some are short-term decisions. Longer-term, the first and outmost decisions: will people accept autonomous vehicles? Will they travel with them? What are their attitudes, their perceptions? And there are a lot of indicators of such attitudes and perceptions regarding the risks, the safety, the security, the reliability of autonomous vehicles. Longer term decisions: where will we decide to work or live? So we have residential and commercial locations. The car ownership is also one long-term decision, and how much are we willing to pay to obtain an autonomous vehicle. And more medium-term to short-term decisions involve the everyday travel, the activities that we're conducting. More choice, are we going to utilize a shared autonomous vehicle or not? What is going to be our value of time, the multitasking that I mentioned before, and route choice decisions. So in order to understand this travel behavior, it's necessary to collect data and model the travel behavior. So we could start from qualitative data through focus groups and go to quantitative data through large data collection efforts. And we have the actual tries on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have questionnaires and where we collect stated preference, what people think they would do in the future. So what I'm going to introduce now is some research that we have done during this WISE Act. The first one is on AV trials, where we recorded how many pilot trials there are in Europe. So in the last 5 years, basically, we recorded more than 80 trials of autonomous vehicles. Most of them took place in the northern part of Europe and less in southern part of Europe. Most of them in urban areas, 63%, others in campuses, and less on rural areas or highways. And the level of automation started from 2015, going from level 3 to 4, and now going into level 5. And most of the studies are usually shuttles with the capacity of 4 to 15 people for the pilot tests. A lot of money is set from the European Union in the research projects that are funded, but also other from agencies, 62% from governmental subsidies or industry funds. And we, after conducting all this work, we took it one step further and we tried to see, okay, all these studies, what are they showing about travel behavior? And what we found out is, and by conducting a meta-analysis on all the values of times that represent how much people are willing to pay, what mode they are taking, and how much we are willing to pay for utilizing an autonomous mode, either this is an autonomous vehicle or shared vehicle or shared taxi, varies across different situations. And these situations are extremely regional differences, and the preference and the perceptions of the values of times vary among countries. We have a lower, of course, a leisure value of time for leisure trips, but also the experimental design and the model specification play an important role. We also, as teams that we met during WISE Act, we conducted common research, and here we would like to present the Bristol trial. It was an Axel Capri mini bus, and we collaborated with the University of Bristol, estimating behavioral models. And what we found out is that people are have positive perceptions towards AV taxis and shared AVs. We found an increased value of time after they have used the autonomous vehicle, and but also we found out that some of the people were not that happy with the experience. So the value of time after for their own car, the traditional own car, increased after the experiment. So these are issues that we should, as researchers, take into account. So what we have done is we conducted big surveys all over Europe. We have 3 tiers. The first tier was a Eurobarometer survey where we, as WISE Act, developed 10 to 15 questions that were asked during the Eurobarometer last year. Tier 2 is a European-wide survey including stated preference experiments in which I will focus this presentation. And Tier 3 are specialized questionnaires to collect in-depth information, like, for example, what is the impact of autonomous vehicle on last mile delivery that we have conducted in 6 different countries. So this is Tier 2, the European-wide survey. We wanted to capture a lot of information, starting from attitudes and perceptions to understanding the willingness to utilize, purchase, or utilize the autonomous vehicles. It is really important, this figure, because after we get the more choice of behavior of the individuals, then we can go and understand better, use it as input in the simulation studies for working group 5 that Nikolas mentioned, and we come back on that. So I have just a few highlighted few findings from 2 papers that came out from this effort. We utilized a sample from Cyprus, Hungary, Iceland, Montenegro, Slovenia, and the UK, approximately 1,700 respondents. At the beginning, there are some hesitations towards AVs that we need to circum in order to be able to push for a sooner adoption. And some countries are more prone into adopting earlier the autonomous vehicles than others, and that the men favor more AVs than women, and older individuals are less willing to use an AV. And this, for example, is something that with promotion and better understanding is something that we should change such perception, because actually for elderly AVs are ideal. In a further study, we modeled the gender-wise preferences when riding as shared autonomous vehicles, and we see strong differences among countries with whom women want to share the autonomous vehicle. And of course, when we have more vehicle availability in the households, then the less likely they are to want to share the vehicle, and car users still want to use their car rather than, and public transport users more likely to choose an SAV. So I put some dots for our discussion. So what is the future research on ACT and ACT and travel behavior? We see lots of impact of the attitudes, the perceptions, and the preferences, and this changes over time. It changes when we better know and we do the field trials and more real-life experiments, because we understand better the overall environment of how the AVs will run. But also we would like to conduct such surveys that I showed before in consecutive panels in order to understand this change of behavior. And of course, there is the issue of how we can use inferences to better understand the activities and the travel choices of the individuals. Thank you very much. And
thank you, Amalia. That was very good and very good use of time. Thanks for this. I know that you will leave early a little bit, so if there are questions from the audience also, or reflections from our group, so please feel free to shout out. And anyone, so maybe I'll just wait for a bit, and then we can maybe go to Karel, like if you could, if you're ready, then I will ask you, like Amalia has presented the travel behavior and how WISE-ACT has contributed to understanding travel behavior over trials and also questionnaires, but also there is a huge group of questions in terms of the social impacts of ACT and how maybe it is usually associated with its potential to reduce accidents, emissions, traffic, but also based on your experiences in transportation justice and understanding transportation justice, and then your contribution to WISE Act, maybe you can open this up a little bit more and tell us a little bit about the broader, maybe anticipated impacts of ACT. Yeah, and also what we have done so far to get some reactions to that issue. Thank you.
Pleasure, Eda. Thank you. I have the pleasure of chairing Working Group 2 in the WISE Act with Eda. So this work is also partly ascribed to her and the entire team of the Working Group 2. So I will be looking at autonomous and connected transport through a people's lens and trying to understand how this new technology might serve different people. And critically reflecting, I think, on where we might be heading, and maybe ending with a warning. So you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
So I think if we discuss transport and transport technologies, and the transport field tends to be dominated and organized around transport modes. So we have car and road experts, we have public transport experts, we have more and more people who are experts on cycling. We should realize that each transport mode excludes some people and is very suitable for other people. And that's because people simply differ very much. They differ in their abilities, physical, cognitive, and they differ in their resources, the amount of money they have, the amount of time they have, the social support networks they have, the abilities to navigate complex systems, to understand apps, and so forth. People differ in many, many respects. And this makes, this creates barriers for use of a various transport modes, because each transport mode has its own characteristics. And you may say this doesn't hold for walking, but even for walking, it does hold. So yes, most people can walk or either roll in a wheelchair to their destinations, but many people, older people or people with certain disabilities cannot walk for long distances. And so even if there's a safe pavement, they might not be able to walk for half a kilometer to a shop or to a health clinic. And they might be able to do so if we put benches. Or they cannot even go up a step or two. It might be too much. So every transport mode, in this sense, has specific characteristics that exclude some people while being perfectly fine for others. And it depends very much on the transport mode, whether many people are excluded or a few people are excluded. And walking is, of course, the most inclusive mode we have. But also there we should realize it doesn't serve everybody under all conditions. Cycling maybe comes close as next because it's so cheap and affordable and children can do it. You don't need a driving license, but it requires infrastructure, of course, and a parent that's willing to send you out on the street. And so people's abilities, private resources is a complex and rich notion. Now, if you look at ACT, autonomous and connected transport, from a lens of different groups, we may see different barriers. So not all groups or individuals, but we make it simple, so by talking about groups, will have the same level of access to autonomous transport as others. So let's just discuss a few groups which might experience limitations. So one is people with low incomes. So autonomous vehicles are not likely to be more cheap than normal vehicles, and we know that vehicles are very expensive to operate, to run, and to own, and it does indeed prevent low-income people from having a car or having cars for every adult in a household. But also in more poor countries, maybe mobile phone, credit card access might be a problem, and we can expect that autonomous transport will be entirely dependent on high technology. So a credit card will be necessary to pay for it, to use for it. It will be connected to your mobile phone. So if you don't have this, you cannot use it. Youth, currently they can't drive a car. In the ideal model of a level 5, you can put a child in a car and it can drive. But the question is, of course, do we allow children to drive on their own when they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old? Legal restrictions on elevator use, for instance, don't even allow a child formally to use an elevator below a certain age. And again, also for youth, Cost is an issue. It is, of course, linked to the family income, but also of how parents allow children to spend their money. A credit card is a major issue. My children cannot get a credit card under age 18 in Israel, for instance. So it depends on the national context whether such options exist, even if you do have the money. Women, we saw it in the presentation of Amalia, there are social safety concerns of riding on public transport, but certainly also on acts if it's shared. Also, will that mode serve the duties that women have to combine, bringing children? It will depend very much on what kind of autonomous transport we introduce. Large vehicles, small vehicles, on demand, will they disappear the moment I drop off my kids and I walk with them to school? It will also affect men more and more. They do the same things, but women still do much more. Immigrants, Europe has accepted more and more immigrants. Language issues will be a major issue. Social safety concerns will be also for them an issue. They won't feel safe everywhere. Credit card access is a major issue. Getting a driving license, if it's needed for an autonomous vehicle, is a major issue because of language, because of income. And if autonomous vehicles are shared and being dispatched by some algorithm, we know that algorithms are very biased. And so they might not serve minority neighborhoods the same way as they serve majority neighborhoods. People with impairments, if we think about ACT, we think about ourselves, and most of us are with very few impairments. I have glasses, which is a certain impairment I experience every day. And so we tend to ignore, like we have done when we design public transport, when we design cars, that there are people with a range of impairments. They might benefit from ACT, but they might also lose out. Do we design inclusive vehicles? Can you navigate, if you have cognitive limitations, these complex networks? Can you understand how to press the destination in your car and understand if it gives you an error message what to do? These are not simple issues. In certain areas, autonomous vehicles might not be so wonderful if they are shared, because sharing requires critical mass, high demand. So if you live in low demand areas, there might be no shared autonomous vehicle. And more problems. We talked about the elderly before. So there are many barriers that may occur depending on how we design the system. So we have to be very, very careful on how we design the system, be very aware that we have to design as much as possible an inclusive system. And if you then look at the possibilities of how autonomous and connected transport will be deployed, how will it be actually introduced in society? Well, this raises many, many issues. Will it be the magic wand? So environmental concerns, traffic crashes, space use, it will depend on to what extent we will use autonomous vehicles. But whether they will actually benefit people in getting to destinations will very much depend on the type of autonomous transport we will see in society. And it will be a very long trajectory. For electrical vehicles, we're talking about 15 years. We can be sure that autonomous transport will take even longer to introduce. So we have mixed traffic in many ways for a long time. So the most expected introduction will be partial automation, meaning on the highway, in congestion, you don't have to drive anymore. The car will take over, you can sit back and relax. That doesn't help any of the groups that don't have car access now. It will reduce the stress for people who drive at the moment. It will maybe enable some people who get very stressed in traffic congestion to also drive, but it won't really address accessibility problems for low-income people, for youth, and for other people who cannot access a car. You can have full automation and private ownership. Basically, everybody buys a car, but he doesn't have to drive it anymore if he doesn't want it. It's an automatic pilot. It will also have very, very little impact in broadening the accessibility problems experienced by groups that currently have much more accessibility problems because they don't have access to a car. And actually, there's a big risk, and I will get to this in a minute, that if we have private ownership of autonomous vehicles, that we will start redesigning our transport system around this wonderful new mode. And again, forgetting about all the other modes in our cities and towns. So then there's the option that we will share. We have full automation, now we can share the vehicles. We have taxis without a driver. This might make using taxis more attractive, cheaper. We cut out the labor cost, at least part of it. It's replaced by more expensive labor costs in the back to manage the system, but overall it'll be cheaper. And we can share it like we share now e-scooters and bicycles in some cities. And then there is the option that we will just use it, or we will also use it for public transport. And we will also cut labor costs there. Now, if you think about the barriers in use and who we might benefit, and who is currently poorly served by the transport system, basically the two last options are the most attractive, but they also are not very inclusive. Studies of e-scooters, shared e-scooters and shared bikes, relatively cheap, show that they are primarily used by middle and higher income and young adults, and mostly men. And so these are very biased modes. And moreover, they're only deployed where there's high demand. So if you don't live in a first-rate city in your country, most likely you won't have it. Maybe the second-tier cities will have the system, but the others don't. These are deployed in very selected areas because there simply is no demand that can pay for those services in other cities. So sequential sharing sounds very attractive, but roll it out over an entire society will be very, very challenging as long as we allow private car ownership. The market will be simply too small. Public transport is and can be very attractive. We can indeed reduce labor costs, but it will also come at a cost. Many people like the driver creates confidence, creates order in the bus, creates safety, it creates a human factor of trust, and also somebody to talk to. So while we can make public transport cheaper, we should also take into account that it might not work for everybody. Now, I think in the discussion of WiseAct, this range of possible deployments and their limitations in serving a broad range of people are very high on the agenda. People discuss them all the time. And I think there is a feeling in people among WiseAct and where we present our work that there is a critical discourse, a positive but critical discourse around autonomous transport. It may improve transport systems, it may assist more people in getting to their destinations more comfortably, more easily, maybe even cheaper. And maybe, if we manage it well, it may even reduce pollution and traffic crashes and space use and make cities more attractive. There is a discourse happening and it's critically positive, meaning we are very keen on realizing that ACT is not a magic wand. But, and we think this is, and this is my impression, we think, wow, you know, we have a complete discourse. We have a multiple of stakeholders with various perspectives looking at this new technology, and this will guarantee a safe and sound and inclusive introduction of autonomous and connected transport. Because what we have in mind is that in the old days, we had a love affair with the car. We were very uncritical and we rolled out highways over our countries and we let people buy cars and park them everywhere. And we didn't realize what we were doing. But this was not the case. Our countries and cities are not based on the car because we were blind. We were very much aware in the early decades of the car, of the problems of the car. And this book of Peter Norton, Fighting Traffic, describes wonderfully how in the 20s and 30s in the US, there was a fight between people who saw the danger of the car and the car lobby. And the people also saw the benefits of the car. And the latter won the battle and then rolled out the highways over the US. So it's not that we made the mistake of building our cities and countries around the car, not aware of the damages. We were very much aware and we anyway did it. And so my concern is that we have the same wonderful debate about the damage, the dangers, and also the opportunities of autonomous transport. And we might still make the same mistakes. So my message is make no mistake. Be very critical, remain very critical. Ask accountability of a government. For whom are you making the subsidies to all these pilots? Who are they going to serve? For who will ACT be? Where will it be deployed? Are these the people who need it most or not? Only if we do this, we might avoid a repetition of the history we have had, with the car bringing lots of benefits, no doubt, but also enormous costs. And we just have to count the road deaths to know what the costs have been. And so if we look at ACT through a people's lens, It is first of all not a magic wand. It will not solve all the problems. Congestion seems to be the most important problem for many people. It won't solve congestion, but it also won't solve pollution problems, and it will not provide accessibility for all unless we manage it and direct it to the right place. And so if you want to do it differently, don't look at the technology, start from people and ask what the technology can do for people who need it most. And so if we want a better X future, we have to be continuously critical about the introduction. And I think the WISE-X program does it. But we have to continue that debate, because the debate has been there in the history, and it was a lost debate. I don't think we can repeat the same mistake. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take the questions at the end of all the presentation.
Thank you so much, Karel. I think you've given quite a lot of food for thought for the audience, but also for our speakers in this panel. It makes link with Amalia's presentation, and also, so if there are any reflections, please feel free. But I would like to maybe turn to Florida now, because Karel has touched upon a lot of issues with regard to accessibility of different groups to ACT, and women is a specific group that may have certain needs, but gender in its much broader meaning comes across as an essential topic to evaluate. So how do you evaluate the ACT development from a gender perspective, and in what ways a gender-sensitive approach can be developed in ACT concerning technology planning and policies? Thank you. You're on mute, I think, Florida.
I know.
Okay,
sorry.
okay. Thanks.
Okay, first of all, thanks to Ida for inviting me to this session, and with my colleagues from WISE-Act Construction. Yeah, actually, we were together in some panel this morning with Karel. We are once again together in this panel, and it's completely, I will just to start from this point that we need to have an intention to be inclusive with the ACT. It will not be by itself. We cannot think that autonomous and connecting transport will be equitable and sustainable because it is autonomous. This is for sure. So we really need to have this intention to take into account target groups, and among them with a gender perspective. So my presentation will be more related to the act between business as usual, like Karel was described just now. We need to take into account that the cars were not the solution for all problems, but were as well the origin of some problems. And then to be a little bit critical, to be then safe in some way, even more critical, because if the autonomous vehicles is so less, if the autonomous vehicles is not a pollutant, is less, we are less tired when we use this, all people can use it, maybe we will have more congestion, for example, or why we think that this will be the panacea for the congestion. So how do we evaluate ACT development from a gender perspective? There is a different aspect. And first of all, if we look through the survey in Europe and the United States, we can see that women today are most using the public transport or the active modes than men does, and even in the United States, where they use as well the cars, they are doing most of the caregiving mobilities. So this means that if there could be an interest for women for using acts should be related to these immense numbers of trips that they are doing for moving. When we observe in the survey the mobility of women, we see 8 trips. 6 of them are for other than commuting. And until today, what we had was a planning system oriented for commuting. So already we are in a transport context that is not done for women, practically. So this is the first point. And then what we observe is that most of them are driving, and when they are using the car, they are doing a lot of trips alone, more than men. This means that they are using the cars for this mobility, for accompanying somebody or for doing shopping and so on. So this is why maybe sometimes they are not so comfortable to use an autonomous vehicle, because they figure out they will do that alone in any case. And coming to the autonomous and connected transport in WISE Act, what opportunities for women, which balance between transport and digitalization, where we are in both sectors. Actually, if we see the autonomous and connected transport by another point of view, that is the participation of women in the transport activities, we know that in transport, no more than 22% of the transport employees are women. And we know as well that in technology and digitalization, we replicate the same number. So this is as well some kind of thinking that we need to have in mind when we think about the autonomous and connected transport like a source of well-being or a more economic growth or whatever. So this is one thing. And then when we come back to the travel behavior, like Amalia presented us in the first presentation, we can see that in the United States, the number and the perception are not so different from what we found in Europe. And women indicate that they are less willing to share and more worried about the unproven technology, just because, like I said before, we are less we use less technology by mandate. Generally, when we were children, we were a little bit put aside from the technology. And for example, when we try to use a computer, we said, oh, take care, maybe you can broke up this. And never to a boy we say that, for example. This is something that is coming on the debate more and more. So this is why we are less less comfortable with the unproven technology. But then in the reality, we see that women are sharing more than men in the fact, 1.5 more, because of course they have less availability of the cars. They normally they are traveling with somebody else of the family and so on. So women seems to express a lower level of willingness and interest to buy or to ride an autonomous vehicles, and this is a very important thing. They are more oriented to use the autonomous vehicles or autonomous public transport in the presence of a human driver or a human person there. So what they recommend from this study that was done by the Thomopoulos Institute of Research in the United States, it was covering different states, they recommend to develop safety protocols and a target campaign for enhancing experience with the shared and autonomous transport services. And they think that we need, like Karel said, some special services such as female-only services. And more research needs to be done to see exactly the intention of women versus actual behaviors. This is what Amalia was presented. That is not so different in Europe, even if here the accent was really on the safety side, on the comfort to be in sharing some vehicles with a person that is not a female, with some difference. It depends on the country. And then what about the other aspect of the automating and connecting transport? That is the digitalization opportunities. Three considerations on that. Digitalization, more women for what? We observe, we analyze the different studies that they said that in the future, the digitalization will create more jobs, most of them in data administration, and more position related with caring. So, of course, if we observe today the world, we see that most of administrative work is done by women, and most of caring work is done by women. So we say, okay, goals. We have the solution, because in the digitalization, women can find their place. But this is there is a but, because this means to once again to not be in the decision position, and in what we need to our aspiration with the autonomous and connected transport should be to empower young women for transport digitalized decision position. So this is something I think that it's really key if we would like an autonomous and connected transport oriented to women. We need to have women in the decision position for planning this act, because until now, what we our experience is that in the classical planning world, we have mainly men. I mean, it's even for the appraisal this morning, we were like 3 women and 6, I don't know, but 37 men in appraisal round table. So we need really to make this effort in this way. And then, of course, there is on the back side the European Green Deal aspiration that one target is accelerating the shift to sustainable smart mobility. But women workers could play a key role in this part, because there is this aspect about the observed climate and health caring attitude of women could be oriented, it could drive this transformation, if you want. And then I would like to share with you this consideration. Maybe it's a time to shift from the social inclusion aspect that is really important, to enlarge, to make this broad, to a diversity and equity and inclusion methods, where the staff should be trained to that. I mean, nothing is done by chance. Once again, we need to have this intention to change the planning, and we can use the ACT innovation for trying that, and we need to dedicate some resources on that. Could not be just a project or a very small marginal part of a cost action dedicated to gender aspect in ACT. Should be a really we need to have more resources and to recruit women that are not only women, but maybe from gender minorities or disabled and so on. We really need to have this dimension of end users inside of the planning. 5 recommendations: just incorporate diversity and equity inclusion trained women. It's not enough to incorporate women into planning process. They need as well to be trained in the diversity and equity inclusion. Designing green should be, we need to decide which kind of technology really we need. I mean, we have a ton of writing down about the frugal technology. I think that was a point as well from the Karel talk. We need to not to be blind versus the technology. We need to be critical versus the technology. And then develop whole communities by ensuring that the digital transport is really for target groups. We cannot do the same mistake we did until now to develop a transport system for white men between 35 and 60 years old. And then provide inclusive digital services that meet the diverse needs of travel, and enabling progress in funding education and outreach for inclusive, sustainable digitalized system. That's all. This is our contact, and happy to answer to all your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Floridea. I think this is really interesting. And now, before we move on, I'll just try to summarize briefly, because we know we might have to make some updates and people might have to move on also. So just to summarize, so we moved from what Professor Amalia Polydoropoulou first introduced, so some of the projects, some of the surveys going on, and kind of a broad overview. And then Karel Martens gave us this really key aspect of we need to ask who, so autonomous and connected transport for who. And now Floridea Di Ciommo really nicely put in the gender aspect and how this inclusivity actually is not only about specific genders, but about including everyone. So taking very nicely from what Karel was saying. So now we'll just go to the city level. So just we're really glad to have distinguished experts. So Siegfried, I'll just go to you. So have Siegfried Rupprecht from Rupprecht Consult. I'll just try to bring in this sustainable urban mobility planning into the play. So perhaps you can give us an overview. First of all, you've been at the core of all this SAM development, Siegfried. So please give us an overview of where SAMs stand, and maybe where do you see any links with autonomous and connected transport?
Thank you, Nikolas, and thank you all for inviting me to this really exciting conference. Let me very briefly talk about SAMP or SUMP, and then I will spend some more time on the topic of the session, actually. But very briefly, for everybody who hasn't heard about it or is not quite sure, here is the definition coming in. SUMP, or Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans, stands for Integrated Strategic Long-Term Transport Planning that has clear goals, that has a strong monitoring component, and that aims for better accessibility and quality of life in the city, but also in its wider functional urban area. So that is the basic definition. But what is it? SUMP is the official methodology of the European Union since 2013 for urban mobility planning. It is recommended as the basis of policy development and infrastructure financing by organizations like the European Investment Bank, now the Climate Bank, but also other banks and other organizations. It is a proven practice. I'm working with my team. We are working. It's actually, by the way, Florida, a completely female team. I'm the only male. I just remembered when you mentioned it. It is a proven practice in many cities and regions in Europe and worldwide, but also it is an active community with a great knowledge resource for practitioners. It is based on very simple and easily understandable principles. It is about planning for sustainability in the functional urban area. It is about cooperation, about citizens' involvement, a lot about performance measurement, long-term goals and visions. Of course, it is covering all modes. Evaluation is important, and monitoring, and of course, quality assurance. Here is a slide which many people may have seen. This is the SUMP cycle, an ideal process of preparation and analysis. The yellow elements, in green then the strategy development, in blue the measure planning, which ends in preparing the actual plan and adopting it, and in red the implementation and the monitoring of the plan. I could talk for hours, and sometimes we actually talk for hours about SUMP. This is the more detailed version for practitioners. But let me move to vehicle automation, and let me start to explain a bit how this could be adopted, this methodology could be adopted to ACT Act or road vehicle automation. We're using different words. The European Commission says CCAM. Whatever we call it, it is about automation in the context of cooperative traffic management. So what are the questions that you need to address when you look at automation in a planning context? I just give you a sample of questions which always come up when we work with cities and planning organizations. Let's start from the very basic question. Who needs to participate in the planning process? In each step, how can we ensure that we are effectively cooperating with the stakeholders, but also with all the organizations that must play a role in automation? And of course, in automation, it's a specific area. We really have to be careful to select the right people and to communicate effectively with citizens and stakeholders. By effectively, I mean not to convince them that automation is good. That is not the point. The point is to really take up the worries, the anxieties people have, and to really make sure that they are heard and that they are given a place in the planning process. SUMP is not about public relations. It is about real participation of all the people who are involved. One issue that comes up very often, especially in the automation context, is data management and legal regulations. Of course, we know that in most countries in Europe, it is not legal yet to have an automated vehicle drive around a city or even on a motorway, but this is changing. So we have to make sure that we are on the right side of the law. How can we assess the impacts of automation? What are the metrics, the key performance indicators? That is a very important question, even if it may sound technical, but in sustainable mobility planning, I measure the impact of what I'm doing while I'm implementing. And when I realize that a certain policy or a measure is not producing the results, I must go back and plan again or change an important element that is not working. But maybe more generally, what are our goals, our vision of automated mobility? Very often when you talk to policymakers especially, automation is more about creating an attractive image of your city, a modern image. Yes, we have automated vehicles, but that is not what mobility is about. What really are the policy goals, the high-level policy goals that we want to achieve? The big topic of our time, of course, is decarbonization. How can, if at all, automation contribute to decarbonization? How can we embed it in our policy framework to really make that very important contribution to the future of our society? And finally, how can we deal with all the uncertainties in the regulations, in the business models, in the impacts? So these are just some of the questions which come up again and again when we work with cities in Europe on the topic of automation. So the question really is, can automation solve our problems in cities? And what we very often see is that people like myself, we talk about walking, cycling, public transport, parking policy, space management, and all the things which we think are essential for the future of our mobility system. And then somebody comes and talks about automation and they have all the attention. It has changed quite a bit in the last years, but that at least was at some point the situation which was actually not justified by the by the reality. We have done a little survey in our project Coexist about the perceptions of policymakers about automated vehicles, and I'm going to present just a few highlights. It is not a representative survey, but it is typical for how I see the perception of automation at this moment. It's from 2019. So can automation reduce or increase urban sprawl? So many people are saying, no, it will increase urban sprawl, with many people undecided. Gray is the undecided. Will it increase social equity? No, it will decrease. But again, many people undecided, not really knowing. Will it improve congestion? No, 40% say it will increase congestion. And will it increase the total vehicle kilometers traveled, the traffic volume on our streets? Yes, almost all people we consulted, these are all policymakers, say yes, this will be the case. So there is a high level of skepticism about automation, which of course is justified, because nobody can say what automation, what will happen. Will it be heaven or will it be hell? Will we have more vehicle miles traveled, more urban sprawl, or will it lead us to covering the last mile to connect the periphery of our cities in a low-cost manner? So I have a few recommendations for policymakers, and I'm going through them quickly in order not to spend too much time. I think that it is the local policy goals that are important when we talk about automation. So what do you think in your city what problem automation can solve, and how do I have to embed it into my policy? If you want to get ready for automation, and I think it is a good idea to get ready for it because it is coming. Whatever you do, there will be automated vehicles in your city. You cannot prevent it. I think, although we don't know when this will come into our city, what we know is that a good automated vehicle is a vehicle which is electric, which is shared. So why not start with such vehicles to implement electrified shared vehicles in our cities? And then when automation comes, what we have in terms of sharing infrastructure, market share for shared vehicles, shared mobility services, then we can automate. And I think it is an excellent idea to start experimenting with automated shuttles, as many cities are doing, just to get into the business, into the understanding of what automation can do in your city, and to build expertise, for example, in your public transport company. I think it is also important to look not only at this one topic area of automation, but or of planning or SCMP in a totally mobility-related sense, but to really look at planning at this as a part of this fundamental change process, this big transformation in which we are all at the moment. So how can we bring the different sectors together, social policy, resource usage, and sustainable mobility and other fields. Of course, it is important to have a good data basis for planning. That is really important, and to have all the stakeholders being a part of the process. So to conclude, I think we must have very clear where do we want to go with automation from an urban policy perspective. I think we want automated and electric vehicles that are powered by renewable sources. We want them to be part of a shared service that is connected to our collective mobility system. Public transport always must be the backbone of our mobility, We cannot continue in this one person, one car approach that we have, that has failed really so apparently in so many cities over the last years. We must think of an integrated cooperative mobility management system, of which then automation can become a part. So this is my view about the topic, and I'm happy to discuss.
Thank you, Siegfried, thank you. And I think your points in terms of relating some principles with how the deployment of ACT is very crucial. I think that's kind of like raises more questions, how automation can be taken further to be made more inclusive, decarbonized, and more in the different levels of different strategies can be taken. I'd just like to, I was just going to just very briefly say, Istanbul is actually doing one of the first sumps in Turkey. So, and then there'll be a presentation tomorrow. I think it's like the good practices session at 12 o'clock Turkish time. So, and it's the largest city to ever done sump. I think this is quite interesting. So if you're interested, all our audience can join. I'm quite concerned with the time, but I will just give the floor to Miloš because we're quite interested in how these, all the topics that we are trying to maybe highlight can be made in more maybe to the policy field. What are the challenges actually when it comes to the governance of ACT? What are the key themes associated with it? And maybe you can give some of the governance context that would make ACT to be deployed much more easily. Thank you, Miloš.
Thank you, Eda. Well, I'm lucky that you, all the folks did the legwork before me. I don't have to start from beginning. But maybe I still have to, as an engineer, I have to still remind us all that this technology is not final. It's still in the making. I think that's a very liberating state of mind if you start from there, because it does then allow you to not just think about the possibilities of technology, but also possibilities of us organizing and having different kinds of organizational structures, which actually might be where the true problem is. At the end of the day. So I'm not gonna show you more slides than this one. This is it, a brief summary of sort of menu, shopping list if you want, anywhere where you start. I think there are still plenty of conventional transport policies, and Siegfried has mentioned some of that kind of matter for this this domain. I think, of course, we have to really work on improving the innovation processes themselves, which of course also means improving innovation policy. So exactly those kinds of experiments or living labs or pilots that are being done around the world, they should not just be about headlines in the newspapers and sort of spending public money and so on, but they really need to be a point of learning and contestation eventually, because without contestation you cannot really have true innovation. And of course they have to be a point of us asking these fundamental questions of data ownership and data sharing and various other kinds of things like that that relate to innovation. Of course, something that we have been talking about in transport for some time, policy packaging. I think at the same time these sorts of procedures are fundamental. They of course relate to innovation policy, but they relate to other policy domains like social and health policy and so on. So of course this is the ultimate challenge of policy integration that we still have. But then the bottom part is where it becomes tricky for us to often think about. because this is the kind of the governance domain. Yeah, the governance doesn't mean government. Yeah, doesn't mean top-down intervention. It doesn't also just mean letting things happen by themselves. It means thinking about roles and responsibilities, and eventually about values. Yeah, that are underneath of these organizations, systems of people deciding something. Yeah. So we definitely need to think about new roles and responsibilities in these networks of people. There is a term called strategic intermediaries from transition studies. Sort of people who would be in between public and private sector, or in between the networks of various sort. But at the same time, we need more places, whatever you want to call them, forums, for this kind of deliberation, foresight activities, but eventually for conflict, yeah? Because if we're kind of leaving the conflict for down the road, for somewhere else, or pushing it onto our streets, well, that's not very nice. In simple terms, it's going to lead to a lot of dangerous consequences and maybe some irreversible damages to our to life in general. So we need to kind of work on contestation already in these processes. But this, of course, goes back to this last point of meta-governance culture, which, of course, is of course a difficult question over always how adaptive our organizations are, how much actually organizational learning are we supporting, and of course, eventually this organizational learning is not just about doing better actions, yeah, or just having better assumptions. But as I said, it's about having explicit values, yeah, stated that need to drive innovation of technology, and of course, also most importantly, also of our organizations. So I'm going to stop there for the sake of time.
Great. Thanks a lot, Miloš. I'll just start with a quick question, and then I'm sure Edda and the rest will follow it up. This is really interesting. So trying to bridge, Miloš, what Siegfried summarized, and also building up on what the previous presenter said. So do you think that the deployment of autonomous and connected transport, or however we call it, as Siegfried highlighted, do you think it needs a different kind of governance structure compared to so urban mobility without automation, for example, or should we just follow the same kind of approach?
Well, I think what usually technologies do, or technological development in general as a process, they are a very good mirror for showing how what kind of flaws do we have in our organizations, yeah? And I think the whole automated vehicle discussion has actually shown us, I think, that we have still a lot of development to do in various kinds of levels of planning and policy, and of course also in various levels of innovation itself, yeah, because this is not just about deploying a finished thing, yeah, it's also, as I said, technology is still open. There is still a lot there that we need to develop. So I think ultimately it raises a lot of good questions for us of our priorities, especially if we turn back to the questions of social justice overall, to kind of overall distribution of benefits and burdens, but also questions of in kind of sustainability in general, climate crisis and everything else. It leads us to ask questions of priorities, yeah, of what do we want to do right now and what do we want to sort of push for down the road. And I think our organizations have had trouble in dealing with that. They still have trouble, even without the the whole aspect of automation, because we are lagging behind. Yeah, it's not like we're now talking about automation in a world where we already have so much people walking and cycling and everything else. Yeah, we're talking about automation as we speak in the system that is still dominated by automobility. Yeah, so I think,
sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, Miloš. I would just like to open the floor for this question to our other distinguished speakers, and then maybe we can follow up with a couple of other questions.
Of course, yes.
So I don't know if someone else, I don't know, Siegfried, I'm not putting you on the spot, but if someone else would like to first follow up this question. So if we need a different governance structure when we're deploying automation, or what we've been doing, the kind of the governance arrangements we have already set up, or in other cases, would still work in this case.
Florida, yes. Sorry,
Yeah.
Florida was raising hands, sorry, but Siegfried, please.
Okay, very quickly. I think we need a good governance structure, better governance structure, but not because of automation and not for automation. We need to improve how we plan, but it has nothing to do with automation. It's only a technology. Thank you.
It's a great point, Floridea.
Yeah, if I can say something, just to stress the point that we need a different way to planning. I mean, what we observed until now was a planning not for all. So really we need to construct, to build up a new form of planning, a planning for all, basing on all people needs, especially people who were not involved in a previous way to plan.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's again along the same lines, Karel.
I would say that automation does challenge us. I think it challenges local governments to be much more proactive. When the car was introduced, I think they had a car washed over the city, more or less. I remember in the Netherlands that local government in the 60s, but I don't remember it, I wasn't there, but in the 60s they wanted to introduce parking pricing on street, and the central government decided it's not allowed to charge for parking on street. And they build roads, and they keep building roads. I think cities have taken the lead in the mobility revolution. It's slowly taking shape from the car away to more sustainable modes. I think they can use connected transport to make the next step. We see already e-scooters are being controlled completely top down. The speed where you can use them, there's no reason why cities wouldn't say, there's no car allowed in my city that doesn't have such a little device that I can decide where he can drive and how fast and where he can park. No single reason not to do so. Cars are much more dangerous than e-scooters. It just takes guts. That's all it is. So I think it's an opportunity rather than a threat.
Thank you. Thanks, Karel. And this goes back, Ed, I'm sure you'll agree. This goes back, again, the governance. I think that's what you're all stressing. So how do we arrange, how do we organize this? Who has this kind of power and authority? But it has to be also collaborative. I'm sure, like Miloš, you highlighted lastly, but it came across everyone. So again, our time is ending. We'll have time for a couple more questions. So one is maybe of any examples, and we'll stay a bit more on the governance for now. So could anyone, I don't know, like Miloš, you're based in Finland, if you want to start from there, but to all of you. So could you give any examples that the governance context have worked quite well actually, or they will be ready for autonomous and connected transport to be deployed there?
Well, I think the most important thing that, of course, we are very much aware here in Finland is trust. Trust in the public sector, but also trust between public sector and private sector. And it's easy for me to say have more trust, but that requires a lot of work, a lot of building. And yeah, it definitely affects so many other things. So even if we have generally teen institutions in Finland, we don't have that many people in general, and expertise. I think it's still you still have a lot more cooperation and kind of thinking about organizational change, also willingness to have organizational change, yeah, when you kind of trust the other actors. So great. Yes,
Siegfried, I was going to come to you anyways, also to comment maybe on what Miloš said about trust and how do we get there with your experience. Please go ahead.
I can only confirm what Miloš is saying. We've organized town hall meetings in Aachen and Stuttgart, for example, and we know of colleagues in Austria to do that, in France. So in many places, such meetings are being organized in order to understand from citizens what they expect from automation in particular, But of course, as this is only a technology, to really understand where cities think where citizens think, or inhabitants, I should say, because it's not only people who hold a certain passport, it's really everybody who is a resident in a place, to understand what their ambitions are and where they want to go. And I want to give one quote from a politician who we worked with in France, who said, never ask people whether they want to have the one-way street going this way or that way. Ask them what is important for them, the safety of their children, the quality of the air, or to get from A to B 1 minute quicker. And that are the kinds of questions where people are experts and where they have a stake. And so we must really ask the right questions, and we must take the effort to work with people, because this in the end is then solving as many problems that would follow if we didn't.
That's an excellent remark. Thank you, Siegfried. And this again, if you just put it in the contemporary context of COVID-19, we don't expect everyone to be an expert in everything. But as you stress, we need to value what is more important. And I think, again, I don't know, like Karel or Floridea or Miloš, someone said it about the prioritization. How do we prioritize between those different competing needs? So yes, Ed, I know we have a final question, but maybe before we go there, we'll have maybe 1 or 2 minutes just to maybe you would like to ask something.
Yeah, I was going to actually say the same thing, what you just said. Trust has actually become more maybe crucial in the times of the pandemic. And we have come to a point that we're questioning everything that we know of so far. And then in relation to how governance networks will work, or like how maybe the cars, whether they're necessary, or whether we should question the birth of them and then question the technologies that we have so far at the moment. And I guess this discussion has been very nice in terms of, questioning all these things and then putting them into the spotlight again and rethinking urban mobility. And one thing I think I shouldn't go amiss, what Miloš said about the conflicts that they need to be taken into consideration. I think these deliberative processes are very important in how they should be integrated in a lot of policy making. This is very important. And I was just going to have maybe 1 minute per speaker to hear their opinions on the future of urban mobility, whether it is with ACT or not, but just, where is it going? I know it's a very long answer that would take a lot of time, but just very briefly.
But just, yeah, exactly. So your quick minute, as Eda said, I think would be interesting to say, do you see autonomous and connected transport being part of the future mobility, or do you see it as being separate? Floridea, maybe I will just give the floor to you first. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it could be together, but really the automated and connected transport needs to deal with what Miloš was saying, to try to highlight as well by Siegfried, highlighted to the conflicts. I mean, it's the time to not be afraid about the conflicts, but to use expertise for solving conflicts, and to see where the power is, and maybe to act on this power as well. I mean, the power could be in the, we need to empower certain, some kind of stakeholders of minorities who are really the target groups for today to be, that needs the service, and to disempower some other groups. So there is create some balancing, and the act could be included in future if they accept this challenge. So this is my point.
Thank you. Thanks, Floridea. Who would like to have another take on this future-looking question?
I think Siegfried,
yes.
I think Siegfried rightfully said autonomous mobility is coming. It is coming at least at the level 3 level. Basically, it's a matter of regulation. We can already have cars driving on highways and basically avoiding accidents and doing it quite safely. Statistically more safely than a human driver, let's put it this way. Not flawless, but statistically better, which is a gain, and maybe it's difficult to accept that a robot does a mistake and more than a human, but statistically it's a benefit, and it's difficult to build up an argument against the introduction of that part of autonomy. And so that is coming. And the question is if we let our agenda be driven by that. And I think we should not let the agenda be driven by that. And that will be our challenge, to guide it, regulate it, but actually to invest our energy in building a sustainable, inclusive, climate neutral mobility system. And automation will have a very small role there to fulfill, I think, even when full automation is possible and we can run public transport there. It will not be the magic one, even in reducing the cost. We already have driverless metro systems in different cities. They are not extremely much more cheap than human-driven metro systems. So also there, it's not a magic solution for the high labor costs we have. So it's really about making the right choices, keeping an eye, regulating, and using the opportunity, like I said, to use automation and maybe connection even more to make our system safer, because there are huge opportunities.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Karel. Miloš, I'll just go to you just to continue. Yeah, from Karel, how do you see this future, and do you see it also automated and connected, or a bit disconnected?
I will tell you something that I tell to our students all the time. Predictions are very hard, especially about the future. It's a famous quote, not by me, and especially if experts are doing those predictions. They're oftentimes not very good.
We'll have our disclaimer here about our expertise, so we're non-experts, yeah.
So, but I mean, we're in the process of kind of disruption overall. That's definitely what's happening. I can see it in Helsinki streets as well. Various other kinds of modes are appearing hand in hand with automation. Karel already mentioned scooters. We have various other interesting micro-mobility devices appearing on our streets, even if it's, you know, dark and snowy most of the year. So I think that's a trend that I think will continue, and then I'm not sure what's going to emerge at the end of the day. Let's see.
Sure.
I would like to stay to that.
Yeah, so we would like to explore, absolutely, and we'll have all those projects and initiatives like WiseAct, etc. So Siegfried, I'll just give 1 minute to you for a final word, and then Eda may conclude.
I agree with the previous speakers, but let me add one more aspect. It is not only about automation, it is also about connected and cooperative mobility. If we get the option as traffic managers to make a car drive 20 kilometers in front of a kindergarten, which we have with cooperative transport systems, to charge a car for the mileage being used and for the energy consumed, I think we have a new situation. And that is another aspect of automation, which is often forgotten. And I think this can be a very powerful tool in addition to all the other things that have been said.
Thank you very much, Siegfried. And yeah, how we communicate, I mean, that's really, really important. So Eda, I just leave the floor to you, maybe for a final concluding remark.
Sure. Thank you so much, everyone, for this, very, very fruitful conversation and the debate afterwards. And I've heard that we had quite an audience. So thanks everyone listening to us, even though it's Friday evening and afternoon for a lot of people. So thanks again once more to our WiseAct team here to take a very, I think, delicate question with the future of urban mobility, but also in relation to ACT. Thanks everyone listening as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.